Hello internet people who like the Battle of Polytopia. Today I'm going to show you how to play the Aquarion tribe, in 30 seconds or less. To complete this tutorial you'll need a mouse, or I guess you could play on mobile. First we just load up a game here and open the tech tree, you press the 3 key, and then you click on the picture of the turtle here, see where it says riding, and then you click research. Well done, thanks for watching, and I would greatly appreciate if you watch the other ones. Off you go, bye. Well, that was the fake ending there. I hope that joke isn't overdone. But let's back up a little here, because to dismiss what is probably the weakest tribe in Polytopia simply as a gimmick not worthy of any serious consideration would be rather unreasonable, and not do the tribe the credit nearly it deserves. But to talk about Aquarion, we first need to discuss what defines the tribe, apart from aesthetics and memes. Aquarion starts off any round of Polytopia with no tech. No, wait, that's it. They have a modified tech tree like every other non-human tribe, but no technology, no extra capital upgrade like Luxidoor, and no powerful starting unit like Vengir. So Aquarion's strength is their modified tech tree then, but even that is perhaps less inspiring than it sounds, since the tech branch of the Aquarion modifies is the riding branch, replacing both the rider and the knight with their amphibious counterparts. These counterparts lack the persist ability of the knight and have lower movement on land, which means that altogether Aquarion units can't even be considered a direct upgrade to the unit set of other tribes. It gets worse too. Aquarion's super unit is the crab, which is basically a weaker amphibious giant. Unlike the giant, however, the crab cannot be placed in any kind of boat or ship, meaning that sometimes the crab will be unable to compete with the giant in a battleship in the ocean. Battleships simply do more damage and can repeatedly move out of range of a close-range attacker to avoid taking damage, leaving Aquarion's units to suffer from an inability to compete even on the water, which is nominally meant to be the main strength of the tribe. I started playing Polytopia when Aquarion was the only special tribe in the entire game back in 2016 or so. To me, this explains a lot about the tribe. The developers were perhaps not yet familiar with the ways in which tribes like Aquarion interact with the other tribes, and consequently made the main strength of Aquarion, early naval dominance, completely at odds with their main weakness, namely the economy. Aquarion start the game with limited resources and no economic tech, having a reduced forest and increased water spawn rate. This makes developing painfully slow, especially with the inability to move warriors across the many islands Aquarion spawns in. Often the starting warrior is simply rendered useless and has to be disbanded later in the game, a problem not incurred by any other tribe, including Kiku, who have quick access to ports. If you end up as Aquarion in a spawn with a decent amount of land, you can seriously consider a second warrior on turn 0 to explore faster, delaying the capture of your second village to get a tech before prices rise to 6 stars. However, do not do this in a spawn where said warrior is unlikely to be useful. For instance, if you're on an island or a narrow peninsula. Rather, take advantage of Aquarion's increased spawn for water, and research fishing or organisation, as in the example game I show here. Once this is done, you should be able to use your starting warrior to take a second city and level it up around the turn 4 mark, preferring resources in workshop to explorer, as Aquarion are generally strong at exploring anyway, and definitely need the economic boost as much as they can get it. The next step is to decide on a middle game plan, and if you really want to justify choosing Aquarion, there's only really one choice: riding, freediving and spearing. To begin with this tactic, I would recommend that you only chop down any and all trees in your territory, unless animals are your only resource. Otherwise it is entirely conceivable that you will already continue to lag behind economically. In a dry spawn, roads may be important, but at this stage you should already have fishing and will be able to use ports to connect cities, if your specific spawn necessitates it. Spearing is primarily a tech for combat, so it can always wait until you discover another tribe unless you happen to need burn forest for farms. And speaking of farms, Aquarion can get a surprising number of farms considering they'd probably all be flooded in their spawn, and it is worth looking into farming in the middle game to fund expansions overseas, which are of course key to the strategy of a tribe that relies on naval units. As for all other units than those I have already mentioned, they may be researched, but I advise against the use of catapults simply because they have no synergy whatsoever with a low forest spawn like Aquarions, and I also advise against an over-reliance on swordsmen, who once again have little synergy with a navy-based tribe with no especially high mountain spawn. That leaves me to discuss battleships and mindbenders. The latter again have nothing to really recommend themselves. They are slower than an effective Aquarion force needs to be, and cannot heal while in boats. The final nail in the coffin for mindbenders is that decreased tech costs on a tribe that doesn't really benefit from researching about half the techs in the game is near useless. Battleships I simply refuse to use on the basis that if Aquarion are going to use battleships, then you might as well just go and play Kiku. That ought to be a saying actually, anything Aquarion does, Kiku does better. Two things may have just stood out to you in the last minute. Firstly, Aquarion's reliance on mobility. The entire strength of the Tridentian is that it moves faster than other ranged units, and can simply pick them off with little to no retaliation, before retreating into the fog across the water. This simple yet infuriating tactic is why I dislike the crab for offensive purposes so much. It moves too slowly to the point where it is almost antithetical to the playstyle of the tribe. Secondly, how narrow Aquarion's playstyle really is. Sure, Whaling and Aquatism are decent choices in the late game when the Tridentian factory is either collapsed, or overwhelmed the first enemies. Sure, crabs can be thrown down as a hasty defensive option, or used to hold down key areas, but ultimately, that is what the opening of the video alluded to. Aquarion is simple to the point of being rather monotonous. Struggle through the early game, build Tridentians. Fun maybe, but only to a point. That is what really gets me about Aquarion. Such great combat, so much potential, but so little to show for that promise ultimately. So, before I end this video, I'll talk about one thing that is interesting and unique about Aquarion, which is the way they match up to the other tribes in the game. To Imperius, and to every other T0 tribe in the game pretty much, Aquarion is a valid early target due to their absolute lack of any convincing defense mechanism other than broken terrain. However, this should not be to the detriment of leveling up cities, and in the case of tribes like Zabasi, who tend to prefer growth to aggression, should not be the main strategy early on. In order to counteract this, my suggestion would be to use warriors to stubbornly block key choke points and spend spare stars on economics, rather than rash counter-aggression or simply waiting to be overwhelmed. Aquarion's terrain can be both a blessing and a curse, but against turn 0 aggressors in Greedos, Illyrion and Vengir, to some extent the terrain is a very important asset. Against other slower tribes like Imo, all of the strategies I've talked about in this video will apply, but against the tribes who favour unit spam like Umaji, I suggest being cautious as well and not overly willing to engage in land combat unless absolutely necessary. Kiku of course deserves a special mention here as the arch nemesis of Aquarion. Against any tribe with boards, and especially Kiku, who use them from very early on, I would suggest an extra focus on clearing up enemy units that are already in ports before attacking units on land, to avoid retaliation and once again not biting off more than you can chew early on, before the value of Tridentians comes into play. One more thing that is worth mentioning is that riders, or the amphibian rider counterparts rather, can actually be quite useful in dealing with these because boats don't do very much retaliation damage and you can simply get in, do some damage, take very little damage yourself, and then move your unit straight back out. One more thing that's probably worth mentioning as well is to leave cities that are on the coast guarded or within range of other units too, as some players like to besiege cities from behind. There's no real magic trick to beating Kiku, it all comes down to applying the principles of the game that are learned through experience. And that's the best advice I can give to you really, although one more tribe ought to be called out specifically here, that being Polaris. These terraformers are similar to Aquarion in a lot of ways, being a late game tribe with naval focuses. Against Polaris my main advice is simple: remove the enemy's moonies to shut down their expansion, and then pick the rest off from a safe distance, perhaps using a team of amphibians to break down ice sheets. And that really is all I had to say for this video now. This really is the end this time. Goodbye.